thanks, Professor Bill Malcolm, for your thoughts around managing risk and uncertainty. Speaking of which, now we'll take a slightly more New South Wales centred focus on managing risk, and that's managing risk on the farm, the New South Wales experience, with our very own Sheena Carter, our Dairy Farm Business Management Development Officer with the DPI. So I know Sheena is no stranger to many of you, but for those that haven't come across Sheena before, she lives in the Hunter Valley, half hour east of Scone, on a small beef property with a husband and kids. So she very much sees the day-to-day rewards and challenges of working in agriculture. The dairy industry is certainly one that she finds very rewarding to work in, both from talking with farmers and understanding how they operate their business, as well as working with farmer groups to help them better understand the industry and the farm business management language and terminology that farm performance measurement requires. So I'd like to welcome Sheena Carter to share her screen and take us on a journey of managing risk on the farm with the New South Wales experience. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you, Greg. I'm just going to expand this out. Yep, slowly but surely. Thank you, Greg. Yes, it's a lovely chilly morning up here in the Hunter, -1 degrees, so good frost about. Managing risk on farm, the New South Wales experience. A couple of weeks ago, I was reading an article on Fiona Simson, who many of you will know is the National Farmers Federation president, but also owner of a family beef and cropping operation in northern New South Wales. And she was asked a question with reference to the farming business. What do you love about your work? And her answer was how you can see the results of your decisions firsthand and how you're totally in charge, except for the fact that your business is reliant on weather and overseas markets, to which she laughed. I'm sure that many farmers tuning in today can relate to this. You've all chosen to be farmers for one reason or another, and for many it's that you get to work for yourself and you're totally in charge. However, you've got that thing called risk, which is things like the weather and price volatility that you need to manage. As an industry, we're very fortunate that we've got 8 years of data in New South Wales, industry data through the Dairy Farm Monitor project, and I'm going to draw on some of that today to find out how some of our consistently profitable farms manage their systems and set them up to minimise the impact of volatility. Which then helps them control operational costs to consistently drive a good operating profit. So to start with, if we look at this graph here, which is the data set over the 8 years, all farms over the 8 years, we've got their cost of production against return on assets or profit. We can see a bit of a trend in that as our cost of production increases, the ability to have a healthy return on assets decreases. Now we know there's been a lot of volatility, season and market volatility in this period, which does have an impact on cost of production. It's very difficult to have a low cost of production if you've got high input prices. But as we'll see, those that have got good cost control and not necessarily the lowest cost of production are still able to generate a good profit in all sorts of conditions. Now, I just want to caution here too, I'm not saying the lowest cost of production produces the highest profit. We know this isn't the case. For example, we've got a farm here with a cost of production of around $4.50 per kilo milk solids, generating a 10% return. And this situation here with a cost of production of $6, generating a similar return. But the trend is that as our cost of production increases, we see a lower return on total assets. One other thing I'd just like to explain cost of production. As an industry, we've been doing a lot over the last few years to get everyone speaking what we're calling the same language. This is true economic cost of production, so it factors in both cash costs but also non-cash costs. So to start with, we've got our farm working expenses up here. which is our cash variable, herd, shed and feed costs, and our cash overhead costs, paid labour, repairs and maintenance, insurance, and those sorts of things. Then we take into account our non-cash costs, so imputed labour, depreciation on machinery and assets, and inventory changes with feed and livestock inventory change. And we see that when we're looking at cost of production, good owners and managers seem to have the skills to manage their business and invest their capital wisely in a way that will reduce operational costs and make sure they use their inputs as efficiently as possible. So their cost of production is as low as possible without affecting their profit margin. And obviously within cost of production in the dairy industry, we know that the two highest costs in producing milk are our feed and labour costs. So in terms of overhead costs, we really can't underestimate the importance of overhead costs. Firstly, they make up a large percentage of, if they make up a large percentage of your total costs, you'll have less funds available to cover inputs that produce your milk. And secondly, if there's inefficiencies in your farm, they will also increase the overhead and operational costs in your business. Now, these inefficiencies can appear with things like neglected infrastructure, such as laneways and dairy plant, which then, of course, makes cow movement and labour usage on farm inefficient. Also, not looking after equipment on farm will drive up repairs and maintenance costs and downtime, affecting your ability to do activities in a timely manner, such as sowing or fodder conservation. And our sort of key overhead costs are obviously labour costs, repairs and maintenance and depreciation. And in the 18-19 financial year, our labour costs took up 23% of total costs. If we look at our overheads in relation to profit, we see a bit of a trend. But once we've got really high overhead costs in a business, profit becomes a real challenge. So low overheads don't necessarily mean a more profitable business, but they do mean you've got more of a margin to play with to cover your variable costs and increase your potential to make a profit. Now, scale or herd size will have an impact here, and I haven't got definitive data on our sort of New South Wales data set, but it appears that below around 100 cows, it becomes a real struggle to have enough margin to cover variable costs and generate a true profit. If profit generation is your sole aim as the operator of a smaller business, we know people have got many reasons for dairying, and it's not purely about profit. But with the smaller farms, it's really the imputed labour and overcapitalisation that's the issue here. When we come to our feed costs, now this is total feed costs, homegrown feed plus purchased feed costs. And again, we see a trend. As our feed costs increase, we see a reduced ability to make a good profit. In the 18-19 financial year of Farm Monitor, feed costs made up 54% of total costs, which was the highest of the 8 years of the project, around $4.50 a kilo milk solids, or 33 cents a litre. And we know that it was a really tough year on the back of a tough year before that. So it's had implications for many in terms of cash flow. And this graph just highlights some of those costs. So this is for the average farm in the Farm Monitor data set. We see concentrates are at an average of $567 a tonne dry matter, up from $442 the previous year. Likewise, hay was around $440 a tonne dry matter, up on the previous year. So some extraordinary costs. Now, our top 25 or top 25% of farms in the Farm Monitor, these farms are the farms that have been consistently profitable over the 8 years. Obviously, some are in and out of the project. We see here the orange line is the average return on assets, and we just can see from the graph that there's some farms that have done particularly well compared to the average over the years. We'll see these farms are all slightly different in their cost structure, but none of them have had years with excessively high, excessively above average costs, and most have either had low overheads or low feed costs as their advantage. If we look at their overhead costs, we can see some of them are able to keep good control on these relative to the average farm, which gives them more of a margin to play with to generate an operating profit, and suggests lower repairs and maintenance, depreciation, and or other costs. But every farm is different. Now, I had the opportunity to speak with each of these 5 farms and try and drill down and see what it is that they're actually doing in their business to manage them well. Firstly, I'd like to say that they're all thinkers and they're all proactive. They're always thinking ahead about their business and trying not to be reactive. So some of the key points that they made were, don't overcapitalise on machinery. As one of them said, only buy it if you absolutely need it. So they don't have lots of machinery, and they sensibly assess the value of any new equipment into the business. And the equipment they do have, they make sure they look after it as well as they can. They'll reinvest in the business in areas that matter, particularly infrastructure, so laneways and dairy plant. They keep it upgraded and in good condition. This then drives things like labour efficiency and cow performance, healthier, more productive cows. They'll also, and I know this is a difficult one, but they do tend to employ people that are right for the job. They have the right skills they need in the business. So, for example, one of them, doing paddock work, the people love machinery, they love doing the paddock work, they really look after the equipment. They also happen to have mechanical skills. So any repairs and maintenance is able to be done more or less in-house, which then obviously reduces costs to a degree, but also reduces downtime with machinery being fixed elsewhere. They try to keep up with technology in areas that provide a benefit to the business. So whether that's things like automatic drafting systems or better irrigation infrastructure. So not only does it improve labour efficiency, but also things like water and water use efficiency. Lower total feed costs. So here we've got, again, total feed costs, purchased and homegrown feed costs, and we can see the orange line here indicating the average feed cost across the years, and here is this big upward tick with the effect of the drought over the last couple of years. But we still see that they've managed to keep their feed costs low compared to the average through the way that they've managed their feed base. How do they do it? Again, they're all slightly different, but they do try to reduce their reliance on imported and purchased feed as best they can. So they have a big focus on growing and utilising as much homegrown feed as possible, and also trying to directly graze as much of that as they can, at least 70% of it. They'll feed budget every year. And on the back of this feed budgeting, they'll then do things, as Bill alluded to in his presentation, such as forward contracting of the grain to try and lock in what they see as a good or a fair price for the year ahead. A few of them have matched their calving pattern to their feed supply. So we've got a couple of split calvers in this group with an autumn and a spring calving pattern, which isn't particularly common in New South Wales, but maybe becoming more so. And they'll try and conserve as much feed as possible. For some, this is a sort of true surplus that's conserved. Others have made sort of strategic decisions coming into the drought, obviously with irrigation, to produce as much homegrown fodder as they can to either, as a bit of an insurance buffer for themselves or as a strategic opportunity to sell back into the market. They feed their cows well, so even in the tough years, they make sure their cows are in good condition so that they can calve back into the herd and produce to their capacity. And the focus on the cows is really focusing on what they're being fed and how they're being fed rather than on the cow herself. Other keys to success. Look, I had some great discussions with these people and they shared quite a few words of wisdom with me, which I thought I'd just capture here while we're going. They plan. They're constantly planning. They've got a laser-like focus on their business. They'll have a plan A and a plan B, as well as preparing for the worst-case scenario as much as they can. They know their business well and they'll negotiate. So whether that's with milk processors, perhaps it's better to try and negotiate a better price with the current processor and tweak production. Also with insurance and electricity providers, they don't pay that lazy man's tax of just rolling over and paying and remaining with the same supplier. They'll hunt around. It's an effort, but it's worth it. They use things like farm management deposits, but they also pay off debt. Bill alluded to having, perhaps we need higher equity in our businesses these days to be a bit more resilient. But they'll pay off their debt, which will grow their wealth and their equity, giving them that resilience. They don't live beyond their means. They're not having great big flashy extravagant lifestyles with toys with all the bells and whistles. They are quite conservative in how they spend their funds. They pay their suppliers on time and communicate with them, and for many this has been challenging over the last couple of years, but it's that open and clear communication with suppliers that has really held them in good stead. They're proactive and they're not reactive. They're always thinking ahead. So whether this is sort of short-term, day-to-day decision making or longer term. So some of them are thinking about climate change, how that's going to affect their business, encroachment, whether that's urban encroachment or encroachment of other agricultural industries on their land. They're currently thinking about this and future opportunities for them. And good networks and advisors. So, acknowledging that they may not know everything and there will be people out there that they can draw on if they don't have the skills themselves and want to do things better. So I think it stands out to me that great management skills are important in successfully running any business. I think often these skills are part of a manager's makeup, so they're kind of inherent. But I also believe that we can learn from each other. As Fiona Simson said, as the business owner, you are totally in charge. So you're in control. You're steering the direction of your business. Looking back at our top 5 farms, they all have slightly different cost structures. They all have either low overheads or low feed costs as their advantage. And they're also very good at grass management and understanding margins. So from my discussions with them, I guess I'd sort of summarise some of their key messages as make sure you're planning ahead, always be thinking ahead and maintain focus on where you're going with your business. Focus on your homegrown feed, grow it and utilise it as best you can, and directly graze as much of that as you can. Don't overcapitalise in your business, and when you are investing back into your business, invest in areas that will generate a return and reduce operational costs. So just finally, as a wrap up, I'd like to thank all the farm monitor farms in New South Wales, sort of current and past. They provide us with all their information very generously, which helps us have these good discussions, informed discussions. And I'd particularly like to thank the 5 farms I spoke to in pulling some information together for today. I'd like to, a big thanks to Jake Musson, data analyst with Dairy Australia. He's been a great resource for me in running the numbers on the New South Wales data, providing graphs and being a good sounding board. Dairy New South Wales, not only for being a previous employer, but also for sponsoring this morning's session, and finally the DRF committee for inviting me to speak today. So thank you. Thanks, Craig.
Big thanks, Sheena.